Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and I am back today with another gear review for you, and that is the Garage 1217 Project Ember hybrid tube, headphone amplifier, and preamp. So we will dive into this one today and also talk a little bit about who Garage 1217 even is, because I hadn't really heard of them for a while either, so we will get into that. But please remember to like and subscribe and to do all of those things that you do to support YouTube channels. All right, diving in. Who is Garage 1217? You know, I don't want to go into super details below, because I will link to their website down below. And they are just a little mom and pop audio shop based in Arizona in the United States. And they have been making headphone amplifiers. They make, let's see, what else did I see in there? They have some like equalization circuits that you can buy, like filters for different headphones and such. So they've been kind of in the do-it-yourself audio business here for a little bit. And I was curious about this. I forget exactly how I learned about the existence of this company. I think it was on Facebook, like on Headphone. I saw a post from Garage 1217 on Headphone's Facebook page, and I was like, who is Garage 1217? Looked into it and thought that the look of their stuff was just undeniably cool, and thought it would be pretty interesting to check them out. So I ordered their Project Ember, which is their top-of-the-line headphone amp, which you can buy as a kit and assemble yourself for $310 US. I did not do that. I opted for them to assemble it for me, which they will do. And so by the time that we did the assembly fee and paid for shipping and sales tax and all of that kind of stuff, it was literally 2 cents shy of $425 US by the time it got sent to me. And so that's what we have right here. Now, it is important to note, this is not a tube amp. This is a hybrid amplifier. That means it has a vacuum tube preamp stage in it and then a solid state amplifier section in it. So what actually powers the headphones is a solid state amp. Now, this particular solid state amp is an op amp based amplifier. So it's not Class A or Class AB or anything like that. Like, it uses chip based amplification basically with op amps. Now, this particular model, you cannot roll op amps. They do have another amp model that you can swap out the op amps if you wish, but you can't do that here, so keep that in mind if that is of interest to you. Okay, the power output spec. There is, at least on paper, a fair amount of output power on this one, and it tops out at about 2.4 watts per channel, which is a fair amount, at 64 ohms. And even at 600 ohms, they are claiming a 400 milliwatt per channel output power. The output impedance affects the power output a little bit, and there are 3 settings for output impedance on this, which I will explain in a little bit more. I'm gonna have a video clip coming up where I pop this top hood off here and show some circuitry, because there are a lot of jumpers and otherwise like user accessible and user changeable settings in here that you can have a fair amount of flexibility to tailor the sound how you want it. And so I will show that to you in a little bit. But we have 3 output impedance settings here that are 0.1 ohms, 35 ohms, and 120 ohms of output impedance. At least that is their claim. I don't have a measurement rig to verify all of that, but that's what they say that you can adjust to. And that, like, increasing the output impedance is going to decrease the amount of power that can be delivered to the headphones a little bit. But there's enough power here where I don't think that's going to be an issue most of the time. Okay. The power supply that they ship with it is this power brick thing here, where you plug in a 3-pronged, PC style power cord there. It is a, 48 volt, 0.84 amps for a 40 watt power delivery here. They say this is a medical grade power supply. So this is the power supply here. Okay. And as you see, it's a pretty neat looking unit. I think it is anyway. I like this aluminum cover. You can opt for a clear acrylic cover here so you can still look through and see everything, but I just liked the look of this plate, so I went with it. Almost has like a retro kind of like muscle car aesthetic to it, I think. But anyway, that's just my opinion. I think that looks cool. All right, let's go ahead then and look at that video clip that I just mentioned where I pop this off and talk about some of the user adjustable settings. Then we'll get into some of the features about tube rolling and what kind of vacuum tubes are compatible with this thing. And then we will come back on the other side of that and I will talk about the sound. All right, so here's a view of the top plate of the Project Ember. I think it looks nice. Anyway, you get a good look at it here. But anyway, this clip, I'm shooting with my phone, so it might sound a little bit different, but I want to take the lid off of this thing and show you what's going on under here in a moment, because there are some really cool features in there that I think make this an interesting product and highly user adjustable. So we'll get to that in a moment. But here we can do a quick look at the front panel, which really isn't even a panel. You see the 1/4-inch headphone jack on the left. You can kind of see the innards in there. That red LED there in the middle is on when the unit is warming up, and it goes off. Okay, after throwing the power switch, when it goes off, the unit is ready to amplify sound. Okay, or amplify an electric signal, I should say. Just a quick look at the back. Okay, we have the single-ended input. Everything is single-ended, but we have the input on the left, we have the preamp output on the right, we have the power input there, and then we also have the very shitty, power switch on the back deal. Okay, so anyway, there is that. Okay, now the screwdriver is here. Don't actually need it for this part because these are just little thumb screws. Okay, you can just take them right out like this. Okay, 2, then this one. Okay, I didn't plan on any dialogue filler for this. You just get to watch my hand to take these screws out. Okay, and then this plate lifts right off here. So a couple of things that I want to point to first before I do that is here on either side you see this high R, mid R, low R deal here. That's because when we take this off, there are jumpers on either side that control the output impedance setting. So that is one user setting. So here we just lift this right off, set it aside, and here we have a circuit board. Okay, get a little closer in here so you can get a nice look at it. Okay, cool stuff. All right, so real quick, here's what we're looking at. So here and here, okay, and actually this is why I got this thing out, so I could point a little easier. But here and here on the other side, we have the jumpers for output impedance setting. And pull this off a second. You can just kind of see we've got 4 little prongs there. If you use the lower 2, it's the low output impedance setting and so forth. And I want to put it back to low. I just checked it on high with my HD6XX before I did this. And yeah, the output impedance setting does change the sound on the 6XX a little bit, which is a headphone that I have heard that happen before, like on my K&HA1A Mark II tube amp. You can change the output impedance settings, and the 6XX is the headphone where that makes the biggest audible difference to me. And that happens here too. That can change the sound from a more of a dry, tight, quick sound to like a more wet, blended together, smooth kind of sound on a high Z headphone like that. So that is one way that this is a user adjustable sound here. Okay, is that output impedance setting, right? And so that's cool, I think. All right, here, this is the input capacitor bypass. So there is an input capacitor on this for reasons that I have forgotten at the moment, but it's here, and so you can adjust that on this jumper setting if that is something of interest to you. All right, and then we'll move to the back of the unit. We have the gain selector. Come on, focus back again, phone camera. There we go. We have the gain selector, which is again jumpers here and here. So with the gain setting and then down here with the output impedance setting, like you see we have one on either side. Like you have to adjust both of those together at the same time, right, to actually change the setting. So anyway, high, low gain there, right? And so like those are three options there under the hood: the output impedance, input capacitor bypass, and gain setting, where you can control how this thing sounds to some degree. Hilariously, I just noticed this when I took this off earlier, is the power switch back here. I don't know why this is, but you can see that it toggles between on and on, which is a bit hilarious to me. On the circuit board, it's properly printed. There's an on-off indicator there. But yeah, on and on. That's funny. Don't stop believing in that switch. It goes on and on and on and on. Anyway. All right. Other cool settings that you can do is right here. You can see that we have these three dial settings here, labeled blue, red, green. You can actually change the LED color underneath the tube to get it to glow different colors in there, which is just, you know, has nothing to do with sound at all. Just looks cool. So that's another way that you can customize and personalize this thing. And then, of course, we have the tube there, which is sitting in the tube socket. So tube rolling is a thing that you can do with this amp quite a bit. It supports a huge number of tubes, or a huge range of tube types that are even different voltages, and I'll talk about that in a different clip here in a moment. Okay, but anyway, the fact that you can roll the tube. So inside this thing, we've got output impedance selection. We have input capacitor bypass option. We have gain setting, and then we have a lot of different kinds of vacuum tubes that you can use in this thing. So you get huge amounts of sound customization, and then just the cool feature of what color LED do you want underneath the tube there to light this thing up. All right, and then the top plate, you can get either this aluminum one here, which I think is cool looking, or you can get an acrylic to look through and see all of that stuff in there. All right. I will stick that back on here for now. All right, and yeah, that's a look under the hood of the Project Ember. I think there's some neat stuff in there. Okay, on to talk about tubes, I think, is what I will put next. After that exceedingly clever tube rolling intro, let's talk about the types of vacuum tubes the Project Ember is compatible with. And this comes right from the owner's manual, which you can download right off of Garage 1217's website. And you can see that the tube types you can put in there are plentiful. You can do 6-volt tubes, you can do 12-volt tubes. And you can see that there is just a large number of different tube types that you can stick in there. Now, I did get a couple of different ones, and I tested them sonically, so I will talk about that when I talk about the sound of this unit. But yeah, I just wanted to throw this up here so that you could see, back to the theme of just user customizability and the ability to tweak the sound in a number of ways. Here you see a number of ways. So, you know, keep rolling if you want to get some better beats and get some better rhymes. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about the sound of the Project Ember here. Okay, so when I first got this thing and plugged it in and got it set up, by the way, the stock tube that comes with this and what most of my impressions are going to be about here is an RCA clear top 12AU7. Okay, so again, like this is the stock tube that I believe is a NOS, a new old stock tube, if I remember from the website correctly, that they are selling with the unit. It comes with the unit as the stock tube while supplies last. I don't know how much longer that's going to be, okay, but that's what they say. Okay, so I did the review with this tube in it until I tried rolling tubes just to see how that will affect sound, and I will comment on that in just a moment. So, I should mention really quickly, the DACs that I used, I have the SMSL SU9N in for review, so I used the single-ended output of that, single-ended output of the Shit Bifrost 2, I used the Chord Hugo 2 as a DAC and the Berkeley Alpha Series 2, the single-ended output on that. So a range of DAC quality there for sure. All right, and then I've had this thing on my desk for a while now, and I have done some headphone reviews using this, and you've probably heard me mention it in some of my recent videos. So I have a long list of headphones that I plugged into this thing for a listen. So bear with me for a second. Here they are. I used Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm. I used Sennheiser HD58X Jubilee, HD6XX, HD600, a review of that one coming soon. Okay, I used the Hi-Fiman HE400 SE, Edition XS, and HER9. I used Audeze LCDX-C, the closed-back LCDX, which I just reviewed. That's the 2021 edition. I used my Audeze LCD2 Prephaser, this old one right here. This is the Prephaser Revision 1. It's been around a while. Okay, still works great, still sounds great. Okay, I also used Focal Radiance and my Fostex TH900 with the Lawton chambers on it, and I also used a Hi-Fiman HE6SEV2 very briefly to check power output. So again, a wide range of stuff there, okay, to try this thing. All right, then I should also mention, I checked the preamp output of this using a Parasound ZoneAmp V3 and a pair of Yamo C93 Mark IIs on my desk. So just in a near field setting, as I think a lot of people would use this with that combo. And then I also used the preamp out of this to go into a shit Magnus amp to compare the Magnus amplifier to the amplifier in this one. So comments on all of this coming out. I know a lot of ground to cover there. All right. So the first thing I did when I plugged this into my system, just to make sure it was working and set up appropriately, was to use the preamp out on it to go into that Parasound amp and those Yamo speakers that I just mentioned. And I was just immediately struck by an improvement in the holographicity, that really should be a word even though it's not, okay? But the spatial presentation and how holographic and believable it sounded as compared to the preamp output of my shit Asgard 3, which I had been using as a preamp for that speaker system, okay? This was just an immediately noticeable upgrade where the soundstage became a lot more coherent, the imaging and the separation more believable and just complete sounding right away from the preamp output. So that impressed me, and I really never disliked using it as a preamp. I always enjoyed what it was doing as a preamp. So I think that is a strength of this thing here, is the tube preamp section. As far as the headphone amp part goes, overall, even though it is a tube hybrid and it's got a vacuum tube in the signal chain, with this RCA 12AX7, clear top, it still sounds very clean, mostly neutral in signature. It exhibits a fair amount of control over the driver motion. It has very good tonality and timbre. It has a nicely holographic spatial presentation with a fairly large sound stage. And it has pretty decent macro dynamics like punch and slam and all of that, and then just the detail retrieval and the resolution also seem pretty good. And I just said, I tried a lot of different headphones with this thing, and the only headphone that just really did not take well to it, I thought, was the TH900. That headphone is just particularly amp picky, and it didn't react to this one very well. But all of the others, and that was a long list I named, I just never remember not enjoying it. Okay, it just sounded really good, pleasant, enjoyable, with a good balance of technical excellence with a good, organic, listenable sound. Okay, with this tube, again, it's still mostly neutral in its frequency response, at least the perceived frequency response presentation, and strikes a nice balance between being smooth and not without being overly harsh and all of that sort of thing. So on its own, I was really enjoying it and thought it was a pretty good little unit, and I enjoyed the time with it. A couple of the things that you can change on there, like the output impedance. I think I mentioned this in the piece where I showed the guts of this thing. Like the 300 ohm sends, the HD6XX, the HD600, you can hear this the most on, I think, is when you increase the output impedance on this thing, you decrease the damping factor. And I have a video about what those things are, which I can link to down below. And what that does to the sound on those particular units. And it does this a little bit on the DT880, but the DT880, the 600 ohm impedance is so high up there that the effect is less noticeable. But it smooths out the presentation a little bit, increasing the output impedance. Like we talk about this dry-wet spectrum, where dry means hyper detailed and like there's just a really quick decay to the sound, and it can almost sound like a little bit like in the extreme, a very dry presentation can sound like there's a very hard stop from one sound before the next sound starts. Like there can be an almost hard break in there. You increase the output impedance and then decrease the damping factor, and it smooths that out and makes it sound a little bit more wet, as we call it. And that happens here, where with those 300 ohm sends, you could hear them start to get their, I mean, they're naturally a smooth, easy listening family of headphones to begin with, but they become even more so as that output impedance increases, and you can hear that here if that is of interest to you. I didn't really notice a whole lot of increase in the bass output or anything like that, as the website says with those, just more on like the whole changes on the dry wet spectrum. Okay. I thought bypassing the input capacitors and even also the input resistors, because I don't think I mentioned this in that clip where I showed you the circuit board, but there's actually 4 settings that you can use to bypass the input capacitor. You can bypass the input resistor. You can bypass either of those individually, you can bypass both of them, or you can use both of them. Using both of them is the stock setting that it comes from Garage 1217, if they assemble it for you, that is. Right. And honestly, I thought bypassing both of them improved the sound a bit. So I will run it without that. If I'm going to listen to this more, I'm going to run it bypassing both of those. I didn't really hear any of the pitfalls they said to watch out for in their literature, which included like potentiometer scratch and maybe increasing the noise floor. I didn't really notice that. I just thought it sounded better. More on that in just a moment. And then I'll mention the tubes. You can roll tubes in this, and again, like it accepts a whole huge range of 6 volt and 9 volt tubes. The stock tube, this RCA clear top, I thought was fine. Mostly neutral, nicely holographic in its spatial presentation. No real complaints about it. I thought I have an Amperix PQ Gold Pin 6922. Actually, I have a matched pair of those that I used with my Monolith Liquid Platinum for a while. I put one of those in here, and I thought that, you know, that what happened with this is just what happens with those Amperix PQ Gold Pin 6922 ECC 88s, I think is the other designation for them. Okay. The timbre just became a lot more natural. The frequency response warmed up just slightly. The sound stage opened up just a little bit, and then the imaging and separation got a little bit better. However, I noticed with those tubes that the microphonics, and this is a thing that happens with tube amps, if you tap on them, you can hear the jiggling like of the elements in the tube, which is like, you know, if you remember an incandescent light bulb, if you shake it next to your ear, you can hear the jingling of the element in there. Similar thing can happen here. And if you tap this, you can hear that jingling in the headphones. That one was, the Amperix were just a lot more microphonic than this one is. But they sounded wonderful. They're still a little bit more expensive than I would recommend spending on this thing. I also tried, and I think it's an ISE labeled Mullard 12AX7 tube, which was also pretty good. I think it was a little bit drier sounding than this one. It's not as fun. I thought, as this tube. It dried it out a little bit more than I expected it to from a Mullard, or maybe I just don't understand Mullards, but it did it. But you can tune the sound a little bit with the tubes, and be careful with that, because even though, you know, it's a $310, $400-ish headphone amp, you can sink a lot more than that into finding the right tube for this thing. So just keep that in mind. So you can play with it to your heart's content. Just know that you're going to pass a value proposition in there if you roll a whole lot. Okay. Some quick compares then with other headphone amps that are hanging out there. Like, as I mentioned, I was immediately impressed with the preamp output on this thing. And so then I wondered, like, where is the strength of this coming from? Is it in the preamp or is it in the amp? So what I did was I used the pre-out here, and I looped that in through my shit Magnius headphone amp, which is one of those measurement chasers out there. It's also an op-amp based solid state amp, much like what's going on in here. This one is not chasing the measurements like the Magnius does, but I mean, similar amplifier topography. So I figured that would be a good check. The preamp section of this, I think, improved the sound of the Magnius overall. Like, the Magnius is like a lot of those measurement chasing op-amp based amplifiers. It can be very dry and bland sounding and just flat, right? The preamp out of this, you threw the tube, livened it up a little bit, gave it a little bit more natural timbre, made the spatial presentation a little bit more holographic with better imaging and separation and that sort of thing. So again, the preamp stage of this and the pre-out impressed me because of that. I think with the jumpers to include both the input capacitor and resistor on this one, in terms of technicalities, the amp in this and the Magnius traded blows in terms of which one was better. I thought this one had a little bit better control of the treble, so it didn't get as sharp or as sibilant as the Magnius can get with some headphones, particularly the DT880. But on the other hand, I thought that the Magnius was a little bit more in control in the sub bass. Like kick drum hits, the little higher pitch sound of the mallet actually hitting the skin of the drum on that, like, that was a little bit more believable and in control through the Magnius than it was through this. But otherwise, I mean, it kind of depended on track and music genre and instrument and that sort of thing, like which one had the better timbre or which one had the overall better spatial presentation. Again, using this as a preamp for the Magnius, it kind of went back and forth. Changing the jumpers to bypass both the input capacitor and resistor on this thing, I think this one actually steps ahead of the Magnius in terms of its just the amplifier quality, and is more technically superior, more believable, more organic, more natural sounding, much more often than the Magnius can be. So then I pulled out the standby for like value amp, and that is of course the shit Asgard 3. And I did not use the preamp out here. I split the output. I think I was using my Hugo 2 as the DAC for this, and I split the output, sent one into the Ember, one into the Asgard 3. And all that, because I figured like using the preamp of this to go into this, like this is already a little bit warmer and thicker than neutral. That would just be complete overkill on that. So I didn't try that. But the point is here, the Asgard 3 is still the better amplifier, right? It pretty consistently, especially when the input capacitor and resistor were in use on this one. Like it had a little bit better macro dynamic impact because that mid bass control was more pronounced on this one than it was here as well. Like even better than what the Magnius was doing. The Asgard 3 also rolled off some of the aggressiveness in the treble, like didn't eliminate it. It was just smoother, more natural sounding, almost never goes sharp or sibilant, where this one still does every now and then. I think even though this one like is brighter, it has a little bit more treble energy than the Asgard 3 does. So it can come across initially as being a little bit more resolving and having a little bit more detail. It's it's a treble boost, essentially, is what you're hearing. Whereas this one, like room reverbs and other subtle things like that, are resolved better on the Asgard 3 than the Project Ember. The gap closes when you bypass the input capacitor and resistor on this one, but the Asgard 3 is still just more natural sounding, more organic, more believable, and just a little bit more technically proficient. Even though their sound signatures, this one is still a little bit more neutral sounding with a little bit more treble energy to it than the Asgard 3 is. Okay, but even despite that, yeah, I think the Asgard 3 is still the better amp by a very, very narrow margin. So where does this leave us with the Project Ember? So this is a little bit older unit. If I understood the, or older design, I should say, if I understood the product literature and the owner's manual and all of that, like the design is like early to mid 2010s on this, whereas the Asgard 3 was like, I don't know, 2017, 2018, maybe 2019 design, somewhere in there. So the Asgard 3 is a little bit newer. I don't know what shit did with this one. It's like they captured a bunch of forest nymphs and made them do magic inside of here, because what this thing does for $250 is just still astounding to me. In there, this is not quite at that level. I still very much enjoyed this. I think the amplifier section in it needs a refresh. I think that's the limiting factor to it right now. I still think very highly of the preamp. The preamp in this is great. I think the amp drags it down just a little bit. And so, yeah, I think Garage 1217 needs to refresh that just a little bit. It's not bad. It's very close to what the Asgard 3 can do, but it's also more money. Even for the kit version, it's $310. It's $60 more than what you can buy the Asgard 3 for right now. Okay. However, even with that, I think there is still a place for this one because it is a small footprint. It fits on the desk well. The preamp in it is really good. I really like the preamp section. And then the headphone amp is far from bad. It's good. It's just not quite up to, you know, the standard that you can get for the money here. But the preamp on the Garage 1217 is much better than the preamp on the Asgard 3. So again, there's a place for that. If you use your desktop speakers a lot and you need a way to control the volume on them, you're a tinkerer, you like to tweak your sound, you have limited desk space, and every once in a while you use a headphone or you use headphones for a switch up or whatever, this could be a really good option for you at that point. And so I think it still has a place in the market for that kind of a niche group right there. Last thought before I go, because I mentioned the HE6 SEV2. You will get sound. This avoided some of the peaks, the peakiness and the frequency response wonkiness that can happen when the HE6 SEV2 is underpowered. But going from this to my Lake People G111 or my KNHA-1A Mark II, or especially the Vielectric HPA V281, which I realize those are all much more expensive amps, but they deliver power a lot more effectively, and that's what matters with the HE6 SEV2. You can tell that even though this one managed to not give you the frequency response wonkiness, its resolution and its detail and like the imaging and the separation were just all falling off. Like it was not pulling out that subtle stuff that it needed to, that those other amps were, over and above the normal differences that you hear between this and those amps, just because those are better amps. Like that difference is more pronounced because the HE6 SEV2 is so power hungry. But all the other headphones I mentioned earlier, save that TH900, sound pretty good on this thing. So it can drive a wide variety of headphones. Okay, that's a lot. Lot of info in there. I hope it was useful. This has been my review of the Garage 1217 Project Ember. I like little mom and pop companies. I want to continue to support them and hope that they do well. So if you're interested in this, by all means, check it out. It's pretty cool. All right, I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching and enjoy the music.